One of the things about the comic industry that I think continues to largely befuddle people and they struggle with is trying to track sales. And when I talk about sales, this is immediately where the problem comes into. And a lot of people use this point like kind of like a gotcha, but it's not as much of a gotcha as you think. And arguably over time, you start to question, what's the point of just trying to catch people in statements anyway. It doesn't really lend anything to anybody's argument. But it represents kind of this frustration that people have with this part of the conversation. So to kind of set the groundwork a little bit, I think everyone understands this at this point, but just to kind of lay the basics out. When a publisher makes a comic book, they then take that comic book to a distributor. In this case, with the majority of the comic industry, that's Diamond Comics Distribution. Diamond Comic Distribution then packages it up. They prepare it for comic shops. Comic shops order. They print loosely based off those orders. Sometimes they'll overprint because the publisher believes that there will be increased demand later. But whatever the case is, an order gets made. Comics are fulfilled through Diamond or or Lunar in DC's case, and those comics head to comic shops. At that point, the comic shop pays for those comics. The money goes to the distributor and the publisher, and it's all divvied out. And then it becomes a second journey, and the second journey being the comic shop has got to get that stock that they paid for to be bought by customers. Now, there are little bits of caveats. You'll say, well, what about returnability? Yes, in some cases, not common, there is this idea of returnability where the comic shop can take the comics that do not sell after a certain length of time, and they can return those for a credit or to be removed off their bill. There's a couple different ways that works. But in general, that returnability is not something that happens frequently in comics, and it clouds the picture without any discernible value, meaning it's yes, when a returnability exists, it's great, but that's not the standard. And it's when we talk about orders in the comic industry, talking about returnability is kind of a red herring to some extent. It's not widespread enough that it matters to any real conversation. Now, you could argue, hey, that comic shops should get more returnability, and you would be right. I think returnability is probably something that is necessary at this point in the comic industry, but it is a different topic for a different day. I've done videos on that already. So why do I explain all that? Well, when we talk about sales numbers, and I've done the videos now for Bendis and for King and Vendetti, and I'll do further for Jason Aaron's Avengers and everything else. We kind of track this stuff. What you are seeing are the numbers from the publisher. In this case, like using Bendis's example with Superman and Action Comics, you're seeing the numbers from DC and what they were able to sell to comic shops. And those are the numbers. This is where the gotcha comes in. Many people will point out that, hey, that isn't the true number of comics sold. That's not the true number because it's not the comics that are actually bought in the shop. And again, I think people think this is a really kind of epic point they've stumbled onto, but it's really not. And I'll explain why. The publisher is the one who's producing these goods and then trying to get them sold. And where they stand, their job is done when they've sold them to the comic shop. That is their customer. Their customer is the comic shop. It's not the customer in the comic shop. It is the comic shop. Now, as a disclaimer here, I think that any intelligent business that is selling this way also has a really good handle on what their customers want, because only a complete idiot would ignore that part and just continue to try and sell things off to the comic shop in the hopes that it'll all just work out. You should have a good handle on what your customers actually want. But be that as it may, the idea of the reason why this isn't as great a point as you think is because, number one, comic shops do not have the financial stability to massively overorder comics. They're not just sitting around ordering, 300% of what they think they can order just because they like to see comics coming. They tend to run on as close a margin as they can, so they are making guesses. And successful comic shop owners, or another way of saying it would be comic shops that stay in business, know how to do this well enough that they're not over ordering on stock. However, there's a couple other strategies that are often employed. Sometimes comic shops will intentionally overorder because they want the back issue stock built up, because they believe in the certain run of a certain creator, and so they will order more than what's being sold on the shelf as a new comic. And this is an important point when you're talking about somebody like Brian Michael Bendis. There is historically interest in back issues of Bendis. And I know many shops ordered higher than what they believed they would initially sell on Superman and Action Comics because they believed that that back issue stock would be worth piling up to some extent, and it would serve them well in the long run, especially when you have like an Ivan Rice and a Bendis on a comic. That's kind of playing two bets at once. There is a healthy back issue need for Ivan Rice as well as Bendis, and so that's what they're doing. So when we say that, Brian Michael Bendis, this issue of Superman sold 35,000 copies, what we're talking about is DC to the comic shop. Now, we don't know how many of those copies were turned around in the first 30 days. Of those 35,000 copies, how many actually made their way into the hands of customers? I think it's reasonable to assume that at least 30,000 copies went to hands of customers, probably more. And again, I say that from talking to a large number of comic shops, far more than most, being in a lot of groups, and just hearing what people are saying. And also common sense. Comic shops do not have the funding to massively overorder. Now, it doesn't mean comic shops don't get caught unaware. Sometimes they will overorder heavily on a book, and it doesn't sell. I think a lot of the death metal tie-ins I'm seeing in Facebook groups that people ordered higher than necessary because they believe that these death metal tie-ins perform as well over time as the metal tie-ins did, and they're not. Many of the death metal tie-ins are not moving aggressively in shops. And so, that happens, and comic shops are stuck with stock. But it's not it's not as, and people will often say, aha, these aren't numbers what's actually being sold to customers. It's way lower than that. It's probably not way lower than that. And in fact, probably it's too soft a word. It's most definitely not much lower than that. Somebody will point out, hey, how do you know? You don't know for sure. True. We don't have a magical consolidated point of sale system, but it's highly unlikely. You can look at back issue stock that people have on hand. You can look at what people are putting into their dollar bins. You can look at all these different pieces, and it's it's not this huge swell of comics. The stuff that of recent, a lot of the stuff that go into dollar bins are not brand new comics. They are comics from 5 to 6 years ago that for whatever reason they've got higher than usual stock on. Or, and this is actually the most common one, the dollar bins get a lot of comics that were part of incentive schemes where you had to order 200% of a certain title in order to get variant covers, or they are filled up with a lot of number one issues that stores ordered high on because a lot of stores still over high on number one issues and then regret it. But in general, the number of comics that are sold from the publisher to the comic shop, it is a reasonable number to be going on with. Not perfect, again, not by any stretch of imagination, but it's close enough that we can see the trend. And in general, a general rule of thumb that I've advised people of in the past is if you take a comic and you add 10% to it, or you take 10% away, depending on which direction you're doing this math, you're getting the sell-through rate. It's really, and I say here's 1 out of 1,000 comics, it's really unlikely that you're going to see comics routinely not sell through higher than 10%. Meaning if a shop orders 100 copies of something, they're usually selling 90 copies. Usually. Not always, but usually. And over time, and this is why, one of the reasons why in the trend videos I do, the sales videos I do, and when I talk about the comic shop business in general, it's important to not look at a single title. You need to look at many titles. You need to look at performance over time. And the reason you do that is there's always abnormal things that happen to one issue or two issues. And I've seen a lot of people who have done analysis, including some of the big YouTube channels, the really big YouTube channels, the ones that have like 250,000 subs and so on in that range. When they've done analysis on comics, I often see them taking very specific points of data. They'll say, hey, let's look at Bendis's run on Superman, and hey, look at this issue of Action Comics number 1000, sold 450,000 copies. It was clearly the sign that people were excited about Bendis on Superman. Okay, that's one point in time. It's not indicative of the whole run, and it's a misleading data point. By the same token, there's other YouTubers who get on there and say, look, the Super Action Comics 1000 went from 450,000 to 70,000. That's a plummet. Bendis was a disaster on his second issue. That's also not fair. It's taking two data points and trying to make a story out of it. If you're going to do analysis, you have to look at a bigger picture. You have to look at a big enough sample size that you're getting, fairly reputable data. You need to include some variance in what you're doing. And so overall, I mean, that's how you kind of track a comic success. But it is this argument that comes up a lot, you're not counting sell-through to customers, that it's not a great argument. It may sound good, and it does mean you're more clever than others who do not realize that publishers are not selling directly to customers. But it just doesn't change the picture much. Now, everything I just said, by the way, I'll kind of repeat again. I am not saying at all, if you're taking this from the video, you are incorrect. I'm not saying that publishers shouldn't care what customers think. To the contrary, because, and I'll use this analogy, because there's tons of businesses right now that operate in this B to B to C, business to customer world. Go into your local Walmart or Target. Walmart are not making all of those things that you see in that shop. There is a supplier who's making the goods, selling it to Walmart, and Walmart is then selling it to the consumer. Now, to be fair, in a lot of cases, not all, but a much higher percentage absolutely than comics, a lot of those items are returnable in the shop. That is very, very true. It is one difference between comics and places like Walmart and Target. A lot of those things are returnable. But still, even though they're returnable, places like Walmart, Target, those big box stores, they're not excited about returning stock. Nobody wants to do that. It's churn. You have to pay somebody to do it. Even if you get 100% returnability, which you do not, it is labor. And if you think about a store like Walmart having to go through, manage their shelves, package stuff back up, send it back, go through the accounting and the invoicing and all the rest, that's not anything anybody wants to do. They do lose money in that world. So what they try and do is order as precisely as possible. And why this analogy is good is that a lot of these manufacturers, whether it's food, whether it's clothing, whether it's video games, etc., they run very heavy focus group analysis against their customers. Now, when I say their customers, I don't mean Walmart. I mean you, the person walking into Walmart to buy something. And why do they do this? Well, two reasons. One, they believe that the only way they're going to grow their business is if customers ultimately buy it. Because if they keep shipping stuff to Walmart and it doesn't sell on the floor, Walmart will cut their orders. And that's catastrophic. So they need to be in connection with what their customers are actually paying for and buying. But the other thing is there's a lot of competition in these stores. And if you are some kind of electronics provider, if you're LG and Samsung, for example, you're in head-to-head competition. And one of the things you need to be able to do is convince your reseller, in this case, your Walmart or your Target, why customers like your screen, why the features are good, why you have strong market power. If you do that successfully, they order more of your product, you beat the competition. The only way to do that is to really understand what your customers are buying, what they're interested in, and if you're meeting that need. Now, that is the case that is absolutely broken in comics. A lot of people in comics not only have no idea of what their customers want, but they don't care. People at Marvel will openly dismiss the customer. I've heard many executives talk about their relationship is to their distribution channel, really trying to make folks like Diamond happy, and then some love to the comic shop. But then the only way they think about the fans is around kind of soft skills, morale events, marketing events, not as customers. And they're pretty arrogant about that. Marvel, there was a famous tweet that was deleted by a very senior person at Marvel, David Gabriel. Not tweet, statement. What am I saying? Statement, where he basically said that his duty is to his channel, not to the end customer. And for practicality, he is correct. But in terms of a business world, it's an extremely short-sighted, stupid way to think about your business. If you don't care about your end customer, eventually you will lose track of them. You'll lose your market power, and you're going to produce things people won't buy. And comics in particular often seems hell-bent in doing that. And there's a lot of excuses that come up. We don't have enough money for usability testing. We don't have enough money for focus group testing. Oh, we're listening to a small sample size. Or my favorite, we expect our creators to be in touch with the community, and we kind of threaten them that, if they want to keep getting work, if they want to keep getting employment, then they need to prove to us that they're in touch with their fans. That's a statement that's been given out by Marvel and DC, and I find that absolutely disgusting because it's saying as a company, yeah, we're a publisher, but we are outsourcing all of our responsibility to everything. We're selling into the comic shop. We don't care about the customer. We expect that the independent contractors, the people that do not even have full-time jobs or health insurance, we expect them to figure out what the customer wants. And we expect them to do that because they want to keep getting paid by us. And if they don't do a good job with them, then, we'll just cut their contract and move on to somebody else. It's like, that's an insane way to run your business. At any rate, that's the general structure. So hopefully a lot of this information was not new to you. Maybe this explains a little bit more why the argument of, well, are you truly selling through to customers that's not as much of a gotcha point as you might think. And kind of overall, a kind of broken part of this industry. Anyway, let me know if you have questions in the comment below. There's a subscribe, there's a dislike, there's a, I don't know, what else can you do on this thing? I don't know, play around. Just click all the buttons and see what happens. Thanks for listening.